Have you ever thought about buying a law firm to grow your current business? Or have you ever thought about selling your law firm? In either case, and a lot of attorneys do, in either case, you should definitely listen to this podcast episode where I got to interview Jeremy Poock at Senior Attorney Match. Senior Attorney Match is a platform that's a brokerage for buying and selling law firms. Jeremy will help you engineer either a successful purchase or a successful sale. He, in this episode, shares 12 years of hands-on experience working with law firm owners, sellers, and buyers alike, and he discussed some great advice. So tune in, enjoy, learn, implement. Hi there. I have a small but really meaningful favor to ask you. I watch at the stats on our YouTube channel and Spotify channel, wherever most people listen and watch our podcast. And I see that over 80% of everybody who listens to it regularly is not a subscriber. I'm asking you to subscribe to this channel. And the reason for that is my mission and the mission of my team is to help as many small law firm owners to learn how to transform their law firms into better businesses, and so they in turn enjoy better lives. When you hit subscribe button, you tell these platforms that this is content worth listening, worth viewing, and they in turn will show it to many other small law firm owners and hopefully help me fulfill our mission of helping them create a better business and enjoy better lives. So would you please do me this favor? It would mean the world to me. And hit the subscribe button. And my promise to you is that I will continue to work hard at creating good content with practical ideas that help you and your teams grow better law firms. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great.
All right. Welcome to another amazing episode of GLF Podcast. I have a terrific guest with me here today. Jeremy Poock he's the subject matter expert on the thing that is near and dear to my heart, and that is buying and selling businesses. But more specifically, and this is why this podcast episode should be of great interest to you, Mr. or Mrs. Law Firm owner, Jeremy is an expert in selling and buying law firms. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Sasha, thanks so much. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we hit the record button, we talked about you having started out your professional career as an attorney and practicing as an attorney on the small M&A, merger and acquisition side for numerous years, working with various business brokers. And then you caught the entrepreneurial bug and you decided that you want to go into the business of helping law firm owners or aspiring law firm owners to either buy or sell businesses. Do you remember that pivotal moment when you decided, I'm going to do this?
It's such an interesting question. So I'd been thinking about it in a couple of respects, Sasha. So I joined early in my career. This is the early 2000s, the New England Business Brokers Association, and just saw business brokers at that time already focusing on baby boomers and the sales of businesses led by baby boomers. And the boomers weren't even fully ripened yet. Okay, but they were laser focused in the early 2000s on boomers. They just knew that boomers were going to be selling their practices. And by going to those meetings and papering their deals, I just saw that they were not helping lawyers to sell their law firms. But that wasn't really the pivotal moment. I'll give credit to my father, Sasha. My father is a natural born entrepreneur. I'm one of three brothers. And almost every day, whether it was the kitchen table, like watching a TV show, our dad just threw ideas at us all the time. Guys, we're going to start, I want to start this business. I want to do this. What if it was that? It's just like the environment that we grew up in. So lo and behold, I'm in my father's home, also in the early 2000s. I was like, I'm going to broker law firm sales. Right? The thought that's really the pivotal moment was just thinking all right, it'd been sort of marinating. I think this probably happens with a lot of entrepreneurs. You always have ideas sort of marinating in your mind. But that was the one time I was like, you know what? Brokering law firm sales really can combine my being a lawyer, being an entrepreneur, and also having experience already working with business brokers to help mostly selling lawyers of small business law firms to broker the sales of their practices.
Very interesting. I think that brokering law firms it's not that common, actually. So most lawyers from those who I have talked to, and I have talked to probably many thousands over the years, especially those who operate smaller law firms, they don't really think about this, at least going into the business. They don't think about, like, I'm going to build this and then sell this. And many of them don't think about selling it ever because they see it as like, I'm going to die at this desk kind of path, which is horrible because I always think that, listen, you're going to get out of your business and you're going to retire by default or by design. And it's a lot more profitable to retire by design than by default. So I assume that you're seeing a lot of that also. And maybe there's like a light bulb that goes on in their heads when you say, like, you can build this up and actually sell this for considerable sums.
So yes, and I'll just make a distinction in terms of timeline, Sasha, right? When I started Senior Attorney Match in 2012, what you just said was a prototypical client. That is, weren't people not really thinking that their law firms had value, and then we'd educate them that they do have value and the value of a law firm. We'll talk about it much more, at least in what we call law firm sales 1.0 is based upon the value of the book of business. Okay. Then in terms of that timeline, COVID happened, right? Nobody would have ever wanted COVID to happen, right? And COVID, in 2020, people realized how precious time is. Not that we didn't previously, okay? But it put us laser focused on how precious time is and how unpredictable health is.
Yeah.
And so I've absolutely seen in the marketplace attorneys that are in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s realize, no, I do not want to work forever. Okay, because some invisible whatever could happen to me and prevent me from spending more time with family, more time traveling, more time with friends. Do I really want to be stuck behind my desk? I mean, we're recording this now in the middle of winter, okay, and I'm in the Northeast. Do you really want to be stuck at your desk, for February and March, whatever, in perpetuity, or is there a way to sell the firm? And so that's another part of the timeline. Okay. And a third part of the timeline, which is really fascinating now, is we've got younger attorneys in their 40s and 50s that are thinking to themselves, like, I don't want to practice the way my father or my mother practiced. Like, I could be all done by 55. And this gets into your line of work, Sasha, which I think is really exciting in terms of how your work with digital marketing, helping law firms grow, thinking about an actual business plan year in, year out for growth. How can I build brand value? We're seeing that among law firm owners, 30s, 40s, early 50s. What's the brand value? What's the digital value of my practice? Can I get a real multiple in the marketplace based upon brand and digital value, and people actually starting to think now that, yes, I can sell my law firm for not just the value of what the book of business could produce, but because, I've got real data analytics to support a buyer and a bank getting behind the sale of those firms. So we really see like three levels of buyers: the boomers, the people right after the boomers, the ones that are in their late 50s at this point, and then your younger generation that's looking to sell as a brand or digital value.
I'm very curious about the younger generation. Those attorneys who may have been practicing for the last few years, I have started meeting, but it's still very rare, younger attorneys, 30, 35, who would tell me, when I started a law firm, I was forward thinking that one day I'm going to sell it. And I had a number in mind. And I have heard small numbers and I've heard big numbers. Like, I was looking to build this thing and sell it for 10 million bucks. Down the road, don't know how long it would take, but down the road, at some point, I'd like to sell this thing for 10 million bucks, which is totally possible. Do you ever have those conversations? Do you see those people, or is that just an anomaly that I ran into?
No, it's not an anomaly that you run into, but here's the question. Okay, where's the money? Okay, because law firms by and large are poorly capitalized.
Sure.
Secondly, except for the rise as we're now all seeing, maybe not all of us, but anybody that's listening to this, please Google the following. Okay, alternative business structure, ABS,
Sure.
in Arizona.
Yep.
It is growing. And it's particularly growing with regard to personal injury, mass torts, but multiple areas of law are starting to have non-lawyers have ownership interests in alternative business structures that are permitted in Arizona because Arizona removed professional rule of conduct, Rule 5.4, right, which the ABA publishes in almost every state except for Arizona, partially Utah, partially Washington, D.C. Okay, but Arizona is really the leading state that actually abolished Rule 5.4, which requires lawyers to have ownership in law firms, because once you have non-lawyers have an ownership in law firms, plenty of money can be invested in that law
100%.
firm, Sasha. Because otherwise, with the restriction of only lawyers having ownership in law firms, and because so much of the value of a law firm is based upon personal goodwill of so many lawyers, and because I mentioned Rule 5.4, but it's important to also mention Rule 5.6 of the Professional Rules of Conduct, which every state has. It's a rule from the ABA that states adopt, which states that you cannot have restrictive covenants on lawyers. So the issue, Sasha, with getting that $10 million often is, okay, what if a buyer
Yep.
purchases a law firm and then 3 lawyers defect, okay, 2 years later, and take a significant amount of the business with them, and there's no type of restrictive covenant that can be enforced when those departing lawyers take significant clients with them, right? So we still have that issue when it comes to sales of law firms, because banks are really hesitant, right? If we don't have much collateral anyhow in a law firm, right? What are you putting a UCC1 financing statement on, right? Desks, computers, right? And because of that, of Rule 5.6 with restrictive covenants, it's hard to get a bank to give significant lending on law firm sales. But here's the really good news, right, that I was mentioning before, is that when you can show that a law firm has real brand value, right? If John Morgan today called you or me, we would take that call. I mean, heck, I'd say, John, let me put you on hold, pause for a moment. Hallelujah, okay? And then, John, yes, let's talk, right? Because the brand value, and I mean, Morgan is the largest, of course, but I'm just using that from a hyperbole standpoint. There are absolutely firms out there, whether it's PI and other areas, that when you have real brand value, so if one lawyer leaves, the brand is not going to be so impacted as when a named partner leaves and takes significant amounts of clients. So it's a really long-winded way of saying, Sasha, that yes, I think that it's not an anomaly. Okay, what you mentioned about, let's say, the $10 million sale, but we have to think, where's the money? How is a buyer going to get, unless the buyer has the money, which again, we're poorly capitalized, and we
Yep.
can't have non-lawyers invest in us for the most part. Okay, so if that's the case, it's still pretty challenging to have the 8-figure sale in law firms today.
Yeah, but I think that ABS, alternative business structure, it's probably going to come to the rest of the states. It will take many years, but it's probably going to happen. If you look at UK, they went through certain similar type of deregulation years ago. Some people would say it was for the worse. Some people would say it was for the better. Whichever side you stand on, it still happened, and UK's legal system is functioning fine. So
So,
it is highly likely that over the years there will be deregulation across all 50 states or majority of the states, and it's going to happen. And then private equity will roll in into a lot of those states and be like, hey, we'll capitalize these purchases, we'll roll them up, we'll create 9-figure monsters, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 million dollar law firms. Try competing with us. We're going to own the market. So I always think about if I was a practicing attorney right now, if I had a law firm, what I would do, I would think 5, 10, 15, 20-year time horizon. I'm in my mid 40s, so I have that. And I would think that by the time ABS is in my market, I want to be large enough to be a juicy target for acquisition, meaning my law firm kicks off enough profit where a private equity comes in and says, we'll buy you. Here's a multi-million dollar check. And by the way, if you want a second bite of the apple, meaning like if you would like to reinvest into the private equity, we can take a little bit of that money and you get a little bit of equity in this much bigger thing and enjoy dividends. Or whenever we sell this whole holding portfolio that we're holding, you're going to get many, many, many more millions of dollars. This is how it works across so many So many businesses, just not in law, but it's probably going to happen. And because I'm very risk averse at my ripe age of 46, I have lived through four major economic collapses across different continents and very risk averse. So I always think about like what's the downside to what's happening and how do we create an upside out of it. So it's a fascinating way of looking at it. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for those who are business minded, many attorneys are not business minded. They just keep their nose down to the grinder and practice law. And that's why some will do better and others will do worse. And if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, if you're reading this, if you're following Jeremy's podcast, which I listened to quite a few episodes. I really like how eloquently you put some of the things into perspective.
Oh, thank you.
So if you are thinking about building and selling, or if you're thinking about selling, then building, or buying, then building, then maybe selling, the opportunity is there. And I think it's just going to get better. But here's one thing that I know, I've had this conversation numerous times with law firm owners. They're like, what's this thing worth? There's that question, and why would someone want to buy it?
Yeah, exactly. And so let's move a little bit off of, and I would love to be able to revisit our podcast X number of years from now and say, you know what, you heard it from Sasha, right? That ABS went, ABS went nationwide. Okay, what we're seeing currently in the marketplace when it comes to what's the law practice worth, it really comes down to the book of business. Okay, we differentiate between law firm sales 1.0 and 2.0. In law firm sales 1.0, which is where Senior Attorney Match has been since the beginning of when the company was founded in 2013. We're in the mid 2020s right now. I still continue to see law firm sales 1.0. I'll talk about 2.0 in just a moment. But in terms of that, how do we value law firms and law firm sales 1.0 is on the value of the book of business. Okay. Clients are the energy source of all law firms, right? Small, big, medium, senior attorney owned, younger attorney owned. We need clients. So when a law firm is thinking of selling, a buyer will say, we want and need your clients. We want and need your referral sources. And seller will say, great, I've got clients and referral sources. That's my book of business. And then buyer says, but I don't know if your clients and referral sources are going to translate and continue with me as the buyer. So in terms of that, what is it worth? What we are regularly seeing in the marketplace is that buyers pay on an earn-out basis. They're typically not paying an upfront amount of money. We talked about before that lawyers by and large are poorly capitalized. It's hard to get funding from banks. But what buyers will do day in and day out is they will negotiate fee-sharing terms on collections of revenues that come from a defined book of business from a seller, clients and referral sources over a negotiated period of time. Multiple wise, Sasha, the multiple that we're seeing regularly is somewhere between a 1 and a 1.5x of gross revenues. Okay, we'll often assist our seller clients, and again, these are small business law firms. It's typically a founding rainmaker or rainmaker attorneys that sell their practices by merging into a growing law firm that practices in the same areas as the seller. Growing law firm will then say to the seller, we will pay you somewhere between 20 to 30% of the collection of revenues from your book of business over, let's say, a 5-year period. And that's the value of the practice because it's so much based on the personal goodwill of the founders of the firm. And law firm sales 2.0, just to explain what that is. And we're not seeing it as much yet, but we're starting to see it in the 2020s, and we're going to absolutely see it in the 2030s. Is that when you have brand and digital value that is supportable by data analytics. We know that clients came in from this Google campaign. They came in from this digital ad. This came in from that billboard, which has a certain phone number, and probably the same phone number for the firm. But we can show that clients are coming in from such and such digital attractions to the firm. And it's not pegged to just the personal goodwill of a founder. Yep. Then in law firm sales 2.0, there will be money paid up front based upon the data that supports the value of the brand.
Yeah. Personally, and I think all business owners should absolutely abhor 1.0. It is terrible. You are shackled to the revenues that you do not control. It sucks. It's the worst way to do things, the worst way to sell your business. I think that you absolutely, and this is something that I've talked with our clients, numerous clients over the years, and most of them wouldn't listen. I say, you got to divorce the name of your law firm from your last name or last names. That is so 1875. Stop it. I know it was cool in 1875 and it was okay in 1975. But came 1977, it wasn't that cool anymore. Like, you don't have to do it. Past 1977, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
It is
And by the way,
very poor branding.
every state in the United States now allows for trade names.
Yeah.
It was only up until 2020 when there were still a couple holdout states, but every state currently allow, and I agree with you completely, that whether it's drawn down to one surname, okay, but when you call law offices and it still takes like 10 seconds just to spit out the name of the firm.
Horrible.
Right? I mean, yeah, it's a waste from the standpoint of building any kind of brand value.
100%. Also, imagine advertising that on a billboard if you're a PI law firm and you have 4 last names there.
Right. But Sasha,
that?
we'll push back a little bit. I hear you, okay, about that 1.0 is not the ideal, okay? But on the other hand, where we started this conversation with so many attorneys not even thinking that their law firms are worth anything.
True.
Right, to your rainmaker attorney, we have a lot of clients. Like we were talking, at the beginning of this, that you're luckily sitting in I'm in Northeast Massachusetts. You're in Southeast Florida right now, and we have clients today that are in Southern Florida, right? And they'll get texts, emails, voicemails into their smartphones. Okay, they're not practicing, or they're practicing very little, and they'll call the lawyers at the firms that they sold their law firm to and say, you know what, Denise Miller just called me. Unfortunately, her spouse passed away. I'll go on a Zoom meeting with Denise and the kids, with the estate planning, with the probate attorneys in the home office. Make the introduction to the attorneys at the home office, and then the attorney that, it was grieving, sad for the family, the attorney that just transferred her trust to the probate attorneys at the home office are going to take care of the clients and the family, and the selling attorney is getting a healthy percentage off of that, while then, being able to be in Southern Florida instead of behind a desk. So I hear you. You're right. Okay, but in terms of an alternative to not getting anything out of the practice,
For sure.
1.0 is absolutely a way for people to monetize it.
Absolutely. But let me counter that.
Please.
This morning, I had a call with a prospective client. It was a referral from someone who I respect deeply. This lady has been practicing family law in the state of New Jersey for 20 years. Her brand is well developed. It's a really small law firm, but her brand, her personal brand, is well developed. She gets a lot of referrals in the practice areas that she doesn't practice. She refers them out. I asked her, what do you get in referral fees on your PI cases? She said 40%. She didn't need to sell her law firm to get 40% off of those cases. I asked her, how much of your top line revenue comes from those referrals? 20%. She only, for that 20% of revenue, it's pure profit because there is no paralegal working on those cases. Nothing, it's just referrals. Now, 40% is highly unusual, right? But it's very common for it to be 25%, 33%, right? So, and that's where it gets very similar to that 1.0. She doesn't need to sell the business. That's why I don't like 1.0. It's much better than nothing, 100% better than nothing. But it's if you were going to start your own law firm, you might as well build a business. And the business has people and systems and profit at each quarter's end, or at least at the worst case scenario, profit at the year's end that you take out as the sole or one of the shareholders. And then people, when they look at your business, they think about not multiples of revenue. They're looking at EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, meaning pure profit, right? If they were to buy it today and multiply that profit, depending on how much you're making there, right, by a factor of 3 or 4 or 5. If it's really huge, it might be 7. 10 is unlikely in law firm because it is a professional service business, but Morgan and Morgan could probably command 10. His profit, his EBITDA is probably 200 million. And his revenue is $1 billion. He could probably offload it for $2 billion, which he won't because he has plenty of money and it stays in the family. That's why the name Morgan and Morgan will forever work, because it's all Morgans. I think half of his family works there, so it's fine. But for most others, I would always suggest, replace your name and come up with a solid brand name where it's not like you're the face of the law firm, right, and everybody comes to you. Like that lady, the reason why she reached out, she said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I recently had a little accident and I bumped my head. She has a scar like running through half of her forehead. And she said, I'm really tired. I've been doing this for 20 years. When I bumped my head and I was out of work for a couple of days, unintentionally, I realized that this whole thing and my financial well-being rests on me being here. I don't have a business, and I want a business now. I've done everything by referral, and I've been very proud of having done it all. But she makes very healthy personal income. But she's like, that personal income is 100% on me, and if I don't show up to work tomorrow, day after tomorrow, we're going to shut down, and then what? She'll get to collect referral fees for a while. But she didn't like that. That realization came to her 20 years after starting that practice. Mm-hmm. And now she's like, I'm ready to build a business so that somebody else can help me generate some of the profit. And if I want to sell it, I actually have a sellable business, because today she doesn't. Well, she does by 1.0 model. So just don't like that. Don't like that model. But I can totally see how it is sellable. So aside from, so I get valuation. By the way, why is valuation based on revenue and not on EBITDA or profit?
So we decided a long time ago that coming up with a definition of net profits could just lead to issues with regard to at least how this structure is done on an earn-out basis. So, right, rather than have someone, claim to us later that, okay, we really did have to give Susie a raise, or we really did have to put that BMW, on, as an expense of the business. Yeah. We figured, all right, referral fees is something that lawyers are accustomed to. And if we just say, let's use the top line, revenues that come in from the clients, it's clean. That's why.
Got it. I'm also curious about this. If you are selling or if you're buying a law firm, can you use SBA 7A loan, which is typically used by people who want to acquire small business? They can go to SBA. You can finance 90% of purchase most often.
Yeah. So we've had issues. We've had issues with the SBA, over the years. A significant part of it is that the senior attorney, him or herself, often needs to stay on.
Yeah, 3 years.
For X number of months or years. I recently spoke with an SBA lender who explained that the SBA has recently essentially supported seller financing. Okay, I don't fully understand. Maybe you know more about this than I do at this point. Mm-hmm. But essentially, the seller is the guarantor mm-hmm. of the of the loan into the buyer. So yeah. I just didn't. Once I heard that, I just didn't put much much more thought into it.
I can tell you how that works. So let's say that you're buying a law firm for $1 million. And you as a buyer put in 10% down payment. So that leaves you with $900,000 that you need to come up with. The seller provides financing for 40%. And SBA will come up with the remaining 50%. And they will ask the seller to stay on for a while. And there will be funds released to the seller over a period of typically 3 years. You can probably negotiate shorter term, but it is very common for business owners when they're selling a business is that they're required to stay on for quite some time to do an earnout. It is very, very, very common. And by the way, if I was buying a law firm, which I cannot, with the exception of the state of Arizona, but if I was buying a law firm, like I would want that senior partner to be there
Right, and
for,
that
you know,
happens in all
for three
RTOs.
years.
I
Yeah.
guess the hypothetical is, and you should test the marketplace, is, is if I heard you right, is the senior attorney really willing to put up like that 40%, guarantee it? And again, what we talked about earlier, what happens if if that buyer, flies the coop and says, I don't want to be a small business owner anymore, and
That's
I'm going to.
incredibly rare because they would be sabotaging their personal balance sheet as well. They would take a
Good,
serious
Sasha. But
financial
on
hit.
the other hand, if they just, we see this often with, with internal buyers, that
Yep.
internal buyers have an
Sure.
interest to purchase. But as we know, lawyers are so risk averse, and we often find that internal successors, they really just want a job. And so if they went through all of this rigmarole, and the senior attorney puts his or her proverbial neck out on the line, and then the buyer gets an offer to join another firm to get a fixed salary, great benefits, vacation time, what's the senior attorney potentially left with there? So,
Yep.
and maybe, but so short answer is, I have not done a sale
Got
with
it.
an SBA loan to date.
Got it.
Except for
So
barring one, which was fascinating, and we see this in personal injury law, because in that matter, the personal injury law seller had a real inventory of cases,
oh, of
right?
course.
Like plenty of lawyers have, like trust and estates attorneys may have an inventory of wills, but the inventory in a PI practice, you really know with relative certainty that you're going to be cash flowing those cases on a certain amount. So a bank was able to get their arms around, and we see this with other banks too, but that particular bank got its arms around the value of what the open cases were and offered an SBA loan to the buyer to pay an upfront amount to the seller.
Got it. That makes so much sense. If you were buying a law firm, what would you focus on? What practice area would you choose?
So I guess I'll answer your question a couple ways. I think you're asking, on the one hand, you're asking like, okay, are there any emerging, growing practice areas that, to look out for? But
Not
what we
necessarily.
see, I'm sorry?
Just not necessarily. Like
Okay.
just like here's a practice area that I like a lot, and here's why.
So here's what we see in the marketplace. Like kind purchases. Okay. That is, if I'm a growing trust and estates attorney, I'm a growing business law firm, I'm a growing real estate firm, I want to be purchasing a law firm that is doing exactly what I'm doing. Their clients are the types of clients that I already serve, that I already know how to serve, and it's true growth by acquisition. Similar to, let's say, an insurance company, right? That is selling, they're selling home insurance, they're
Mm-hmm.
selling business insurance, and they're purchasing, another insurance company that is doing the exact same as they do. That's what we see in the marketplace as the best purchase. And by the way, so why also, Sasha, for that, the seller is going to be very comfortable selling to another law firm that can already capably the next day continue to represent the seller's clients.
Got it. That makes sense. You didn't ask me, but I'll still answer. If I was buying a law firm, I would definitely buy a family law firm.
Okay.
Plenty of demand in every geographical market. I think estate law will shrink over time because a lot of it is very prescriptive, meaning you ask a question, they give you an answer, you ask a question, they give you an answer, they ask a question, you ask a question, they give you an answer, then you complete paperwork and here's an estate plan. I'm way oversimplifying it. Please do not be pissed at me and turn off this podcast if you're watching or listening to this. I'm not saying you, Jeremy, but whoever's listening or watching this. Like, I just think that there will be shrinkage in that. And in certain other practice areas, I think there will be shrinkage, but there will be no shrinkage in family law because couples will always fight. There will always be divorces. It will be really hard to replace a divorce attorney
Got it.
with
All right.
with
So
an
let me just,
AI. And
so
there are
let me,
very healthy profits there.
yeah, I'll give you a couple perspectives on that. So on the
Cool.
family part, law part, I'll just share that and I heard this from Mike Mogul, who's a great marketer for law firms, who said something to me, and it really made me pause. But I think he's right. I don't know if I should say unfortunately here, Sasha. Is that the best marketers get the cases today?
Sure.
So,
Always
like when
have been
you're
like
saying
that.
about family law, right? The family law attorneys, the growing ones that are going to market appropriately, because the audience today is going straight to Google and
Yep.
searching, best divorce attorney near me,
Yep.
best
Yep.
this type of divorce attorney. I
Yep.
agree with you about that. That marketplace is recession proof. Okay, unfortunately, with the high rate of divorces, and needs for modifications,
Yep.
and child support and
Yep.
whatnot, that practice area is going to continue to be a viable practice area for the foreseeable future. On the trust and estates, though, let me just share a perspective with you in that perhaps the writing of estate plans is going to become more of a commodity, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On the other hand, though, if we think of where we are societally, okay, with the graying of America, with the boomers, okay, the rising need of elder law and probate attorneys and trust attorneys to be able to succeed, to senior attorneys that have written millions of estate plans for Americans. That's actually a really interesting growth area. If someone's looking to grow a law firm, and we're starting to see this a bit, but here's, I don't know what I should call this, a takeaway, a nugget, for the entrepreneurs that are listening to this. Okay, my advice is to go out and identify senior attorney-led trust and estates attorneys, because those let people live forever. But the amount of property and money that is going to be transferred, as well as, unfortunately, intra-sibling fighting that's going to happen as the baby boomers continue to age
I
and
haven't
pass
thought
away,
of that angle. That
is a
makes sense.
significant opportunity.
So it's a really interesting point. I think that like I take it. It makes sense. We may see some shrinkage, but I think you're also right, and there's plenty of opportunity in that space as well. Okay. When people start thinking about acquiring business, a law firm, or they start thinking about selling business, what are the primary three questions that they should be asking you? And by the way, how do they connect with you?
So to connect with me, the website, seniorattorneymatch.com, we publish a lot to social media. So pretty much every day of the week, on weekdays, we're publishing content. Our goal is to be a significant thought leader in the space of succession planning and law firm sales. So we have social media posts to LinkedIn, Facebook, Threads. We just started on Instagram finally, on a daily basis.
I personally highly recommend Jeremy's podcast. It's a wealth of information.
Well, thank you. That's very
Yeah,
kind.
absolutely. So what are the three typical questions that should be asked, correct questions that should be asked by a potential buyer of a law firm?
So from a potential buyer of a law firm, first of all, it goes back to your question before of what type of practice area do I want to grow? Do I want to grow my practice? And what we see often is that people just think, all right, if I'm doing family law, why don't I add trust and estates? Or if I'm doing family law, why don't I add personal injury? So again, like what we see, the most successful purchases are staying in your lane, purchase a
Yep.
like kind law firm. So that's
Yep.
something I think that people should be thinking of in terms of first question of, all right, what type of firm? Second one is we just recommend that people expand the pie of options to be considering. So here is another, I guess I'll call this one a nugget as well, is that any firm that has younger attorneys at it that you would think those younger attorneys want to take over the practice, 99% of those firms, those younger attorneys do not want to purchase the practice. So in terms of the pool of potential sellers, even if you have someone that you think like, wow, I'd love to purchase their practice, but Sally and Mike are there and they've been there for 20 years. In our experience, all that Sally and Mike want is a reliable, predictable, and safe job. So I think something for buyers to think of is to expand the options that almost any firm that's within your like kind type practice area can and should be a target. Third thing to be thinking about is how important culture is. Right? Buyers, every law firm, every business has its own culture. And we work mostly with sellers, but I'll just share this advice because we see it on the buy side and on the sell side, is to try to avoid puppy love. It's like, go back to when you were 15 and you thought that, such and such a person, would be the greatest boyfriend or girlfriend. And all your friends are like, no, we know you're attracted to that person, but that person could be a train wreck for you, And so even though on paper it might look right, like culture is huge because we've only had a couple deals that didn't work. And Sasha, I never even thought about it from this standpoint right now, but I think there is a commonality in the culture clash that we could have and should have identified because they fell apart. The deals fell apart for several reasons, but what really was culture. And that's huge because even if on paper the numbers look good, if the culture isn't right, it's going to eventually kill the deal.
That makes perfect sense. Jeremy, thank you so much for all the insights. Again, I cannot recommend your podcast enough. Go check out Jeremy's podcast. It is truly, 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 truly terrific. And again, it's called Senior Attorney Match Podcast, a namesake of the website also, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And we also have, live stream programs called the State of the Market for Law Firm Sales in 11 minutes.
That's awesome. I did
And
not
the
know about that.
Law Firm Seller Show.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about buying or if you're thinking about selling, the process typically, in my experience and from having been part of the business buying and selling community for numerous years, that process from the first thought to actually signing on the dotted line is easily 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The sooner you start listening, the sooner you start learning, the better prepared you're going to be for either selling your business and getting a top buck for it or buying a good business at the right price. So can't recommend this enough. Jeremy, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Awesome. Sasha, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Great conversation. Thanks so much.